I'm just curious. Take a look at this. So we keep hearing about how data-driven the organization is. I get that. I'm not afraid of data. I hate analytics. But the most important data here is the history that they have when hiring these guys. Stefanski was successful. The last couple years he wasn't. He has almost 2/3 of their wins as a head coach. You had Kitchens for a year. You had Hugh Jackson. That was a disaster. Patton for a couple years, and Chudzinski. Those were, guys that were young, that had never had head coaching jobs, as was Freddie Kitchens. So when you go through the process and you don't have a lot of success, wouldn't you start looking at the process? I would think if in his other businesses, Jimmy was looking at it and, gosh, our profits are down. We're not doing this. Wouldn't you change the process? Am I reading too much into this?
Yeah, I don't want to make too many comments about that business because there was all kinds of issues with that business that we're very well aware of. So, to your point, Dave, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here as far as I'm concerned. I was of the camp that I didn't think Kevin Stefanski deserved to be fired after this season. And when like you just did with your data, you point out that he had 45 of the 68 wins. I will say this on the pro side of the Haslam's ledger here is that they talked a lot about how impatient they were with those early firings, whether it was Chudzinski or Pettin or Hugh Jackson, and that they needed to take a more a slower approach. Now, Paul DePodesta is not here anymore. We all know that he was Dr. Data in that building over there. So yeah, it's one of these things, Dave, that we're all gonna dig deep, and until they get this name out there, and thank God we are, if not hours, then only days away from a final decision being made here. So I think we've just gotten to the point now that we've exhausted every avenue of this search. I think people wanted it to be, I think people, the sense was that if you're going to fire Kevin Stefanski, you better have a plan. And with the way this thing has kind of taken some twists and turns over the last couple of weeks, it's made people kind of, have that, mistrust, if you will, for the front office and for the ownership. And rightfully so. I mean, this has not been good. And I know that, Jimmy Haslam really pushed back a lot about the dysfunction comment that was made after Stefanski was fired, and whether or not there was a rift between with Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Barry in the front office. But dysfunction is what this franchise has been for the better part of 2 decades. And so until they get the right guy, until they get it right, until they get the franchise quarterback, if he's out there, and until they start winning games on a consistent year-to-year basis when they're making the playoffs, everybody can second guess them. That's our right as fans and media.
Yeah. The other thing is, I don't want to come. Haslam wants to win. Anybody who thinks the owner doesn't want to win isn't paying attention. He wants to win.
Right.
The thing I question is he setting up a structure that allows somebody to come in and win?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought, Stefanski inherited a pretty good situation when he got here, right? And I felt like he built upon it. And then obviously, they felt at the end of this year that his voice was no longer resonating, in the locker room or in the building for that matter. You and I have talked about this before, Dave. I mean, there's so many other variables at play here that contributed to where we're at. We've talked and kicked around the Deshaun Watson trade for years now, and rightfully so, because it in a way, it has set back this franchise for the better part of a decade. And until they get out from underneath it, this is going to continue to be the way that it is. And then obviously, when you factor in, injuries and just, general bad luck, that's contributed to where this Browns team is at now. And now, and going back to what, some of these national reports, the Browns are an easy target. And, again, a lot of that is their own fault, much like the self-inflicted wounds with bad trades and bad drafts and bad decisions. That just led them to be, essentially a late night talk show, punchline. And it's been that way for far too long. And I can understand why, Browns fans are, they've had it, so many of them. There's so many people that I know that have not renewed season tickets. And I know this past year really, from an ownership standpoint, has really been a drive to get this new stadium built. And it feels like the football side of things has been neglected. So it's where we're at now. It doesn't make the winter go away any faster when you have these kinds of things hanging over you. But I think the good thing, though, Dave, is as I mentioned earlier, is that a decision is near. I think once, whether it's Schwartz or Shieldhouse, there will be a pivot then when that happens, and you will have some momentum and you'll have something to get excited about. But right now, we're still kind of in that never land.